Okay, so welcome to another deep dive. You know how this works, right? You send us the source material this time. It's excerpts from a documentary on the Iliad.
The myth of the Iliad.
Right, the myth of the Iliad, and we get to go through it all and extract, the core stuff that will stick with you, the real insights that will give you real understanding. And today, we're diving into, this is a story so famous, it's a proverb, the Trojan horse.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have the documentary transcript, and I think what's interesting about this particular deep dive is that the Trojan horse is so well known, the story's been told and retold for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
But we really want to use this deep dive to get into the nuances and, what made the Trojans fall for this? What does it tell us about warfare, about human nature?
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get into it.
So think about it, right? 10 years.
10 years, yeah.
The Greek armies hammering at the gates of Troy, and in silence. Our deep dive starts on this deserted Trojan plain. And I want you to imagine the scene, lingering smoke from burning tents.
That they torched themselves.
Right. They torched their own camp.
Mm-hmm.
And their massive fleet.
Oh.
Gone. Just an empty horizon. What must have been going through the minds of the Trojans?
Well, yeah, and, keep in mind that for 10 years, their entire lives have revolved around the siege.
Yeah.
The constant threat, the battles, and suddenly stillness.
Right.
It must have been almost eerie. And then, of course, there's this huge wooden horse.
Right.
Just standing alone on the beach. And the documentary actually mentions that it was ostensibly a monument or a farewell gesture after Hector's funeral rites.
Right. So let's unpack that initial confusion then. Because after all this time, the Greeks just leave.
Yeah.
The Trojans must have been grappling with so many different emotions at the same time, right? Relief, suspicion.
Absolutely.
And King Priam, right, very cautious, orders the gates to be open, but he even ventures out himself to the abandoned Greek camp.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in that moment, Priam isn't just surveying, an empty military installation.
Right.
The documentary really emphasizes this moment. Priam going to the very spot where he recovered Hector's body.
Wow.
This isn't just a strategic retreat, for the Trojans, this is deeply personal. And this is a landscape, filled with loss and memory. So the absence of the Greeks would have been really powerful on multiple levels.
Right. And so as the Trojans are gathering around this bizarre wooden structure, right, all these theories are emerging. Is it a trap disguised as a retreat? Is it some kind of final gesture? Or could it genuinely be an offering to appease the gods, after all this destruction? You can imagine the debates raging within the city walls.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where Cassandra comes in. This tragic figure, cursed with foresight, but doomed to be disbelieved. And her reaction is immediate. The documentary highlights, she's burn it, destroy it, utterly thrown into the sea. She was absolutely certain it was a trick. And it always makes me wonder, why do you think her warnings consistently fell on deaf ears?
That is the question, is it? And I think, perhaps after so long, the Trojans just desperately wanted to believe that it was over.
Yeah.
And maybe Cassandra's constant prophecies of doom had just worn them down.
Yeah.
But Hecuba, right, Priam's wife, also voiced her suspicions, even though ultimately her concerns were overshadowed. And then you have Paris.
Right.
The romantic, admiring the sheer scale of the horse, saying it's this magnificent gift for the victor.
Right. A title he clearly still believed belonged to Troy.
Of course. Yeah.
Which I think is really interesting because it becomes a study in group psychology.
Oh, yeah.
You have rational fear clashing with wishful thinking and perhaps even a degree of war fatigue.
Yeah.
And Cassandra's this voice saying, beware Greeks bearing gifts.
Right.
It's a line that's resonated through history and for a good reason.
Yeah. And then we have Helen. The figure at the heart of this entire conflict and her actions here are so intriguing. The documentary describes her silently circling the horse 3 times and then calling out the names of the wives of prominent Greek warriors, Penelope, Clytemnestra, Aegiale.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting because it's pregnant with tension and ambiguity.
Yeah.
And the documentary suggests that she was hoping to provoke a reaction from any hidden Greeks. So if they were overcome with emotion upon hearing their wives' names, they might accidentally reveal themselves. It's this very subtle, almost desperate prib. It's the psychological gambit.
Right.
Was she testing the silence? Was there maybe even a pang of loyalty to her former compatriot?
Just imagine, right, the weight of those names hanging in the air.
Yeah.
Helen, the cause of all of this, her voice echoing in this sudden, quiet calling to potential enemies concealed within this wooden behemoth. And the answer?
Silence.
Silence. I mean, that must have been so powerful for so many Trojans to think, okay, the Greeks really are gone.
Yeah, that silence must have really cemented their belief in the Greek departure. But Cassandra is still not convinced.
Right.
And she takes this incredibly powerful and almost desperate action. She hurls her spear at the horse, and the documentary really emphasizes the force and the conviction behind this gesture.
And wouldn't you know it, that spear hitting the wood was no mere accident?
Oh, no.
Inside that seemingly hollow structure were not just a few scouts. There was a significant contingent of elite Greek warriors.
Yeah, including Menelaus, Achilles, although his fate takes a turn later in the story, and the architect of this whole scheme, Odysseus.
Wow, talk about high stakes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, can you imagine Odysseus' plan was so audacious?
Yeah.
To cram all of these heavily armed men into a confined wooden space, completely at the mercy of, someone hearing them or seeing them. The documentary really drives home how much risk was involved. The wood creaking, someone coughing, anything could have given them away. And the psychological pressure inside that horse must have been immense.
But just as Cassandra's suspicions seem to be confirmed, a distraction arrives. A captured Greek soldier named Sinon is brought before Priam. He had been found near the abandoned camp, and he's covered in what appear to be self-inflicted wounds.
Interesting.
And Sinon proceeds to just unleash this masterful piece of deception.
Wow.
And the documentary really highlights all the layers of this fabricated story that he comes up with.
Okay.
He claims to have deserted the Greek army following a dispute among the leaders after Hector's death.
Oh, wow.
Agamemnon had criticized Achilles for allowing Hector an honorable burial, and Achilles, still grieving, declares that he's finally avenged and he's leaving.
It's a smart story.
Right. It's designed to appeal to Trojan pride and sow these seeds of division among the Greeks.
It is, yeah.
And Sinon continues right without their star player Achilles. The other Greek kings are demoralized. They're weary after 10 years of this seemingly pointless war, and they decide to just finally call it quits.
Yeah.
Head back home. It's plausible, right?
It is.
It plays on the Trojans' hopes and perhaps their knowledge of internal squabbles within the Greek ranks.
Exactly, and it all makes sense. This is a war that's been dragging on for 10 years.
Yeah.
But the deception, it goes even deeper than that. So Sinon then introduces the seer Calchas into his tale.
Right.
And he claims that Calchas prophesied that Troy could never be taken and advised the Greeks to abandon the siege. However, and there's always a however in these stories, just as their arrival at Troy demanded the sacrifice of Iphigenia, their departure also required a blood offering for a safe journey home.
And so Sinon, I'm guessing he got picked.
Well, wouldn't you know, a poor Sinon drew the short straw.
Oh, no.
He claims that he was chosen as the human sacrifice designated by Odysseus himself.
Of course, Odysseus.
But he managed to escape just as the Greeks were setting sail.
Right, a very convenient escape.
Very convenient.
To explain his wounds and his presence there.
Exactly. And then comes the supposed reason for the giant wooden horse. Sinon claims it's an offering to Athena divined by Calchas after unfavorable winds prevented their fleet from leaving. But here's the twist. Its immense size reaching towards the heavens was deliberately intended to prevent the Trojans from bringing it inside their city. Why that detail? What do you think?
I mean, classic reverse psychology, right?
Yeah.
Make something seem undesirable, and all of a sudden you've piqued their curiosity.
Absolutely.
But Sinon has one more crucial element to his lie. He relays Calchas' supposed prophecy. If the Trojans harm this offering to Athena, they will incur the wrath of this powerful goddess of war. However, if they manage to bring it within their walls, they will one day conquer all of Greece. I mean, talk about a tempting prospect.
It's huge, isn't it? And I think for Priam, listening to this intricate web of lies, he begins to see a new reality unfolding. The gods have perhaps shifted their favor towards Troy. The departure of the Greeks, the seemingly divine offering, starts to fit this narrative of hope and future glory. And the lure of divine favor and the promise of ultimately defeating their longtime enemy, it's incredibly potent.
Doubt turns into conviction.
Yeah.
And Priam, now see the gods on Troy's side, declares that this horse is not a threat, but a gift. A means to secure Athena's favor and finally put an end to Greek arrogance, and his decree is immediate. The horse must be brought into the city.
Right.
Without delay, they'll even build a grand new temple to honor Athena.
Wow.
And so begins this monumental undertaking of moving this massive wooden structure.
Yeah.
The Trojans, now energized by a sense of impending victory and divine blessing, throw themselves into this task. They're using rollers' ropes, all their collective strength. They even dismantle sections of their seemingly impenetrable city walls to create a passage wide enough. What's the significance of that?
It's a powerful symbol, isn't it? I mean, they're literally breaching their own defenses, dismantling their hard-won security to welcome in this gift. And the documentary points out a few really ominous signs that the Trojans completely ignore.
Oh.
4 separate times, the massive horse stumbles during its journey into Troy, and each time the distinct sound of weapons clanking can be heard from within its belly.
They didn't notice that.
They are so caught up in the euphoria of this moment, in the belief that their troubles are finally over, that they completely ignore these very obvious warning signs. They so desperately want to believe Sinon's story and to embrace this victory that it blinds them to the danger. And the horse is finally positioned in the very heart of Troy, and the city erupts in a massive celebration, feasting, drinking, dancing in the streets, a city just delirious with relief and anticipation of future glory.
And as night descends and the exhausted city slumbers, Sinon, the very man Priam had shown such misplaced trust in, puts the final stage of the plan into motion.
Oh, wow.
The documentary describes him silently climbing into the horse, locating a hidden trapdoor, and opening it to the waiting darkness.
It's incredible.
Oh, yeah.
So in that moment, the seemingly inert monument gives birth to destruction.
Right.
Odysseus and his elite warriors emerge into the quiet sleeping city. And from the city ramparts, they light prearranged signal fires.
Right.
A beacon to their comrades waiting just offshore.
Because the Greek fleet hadn't sailed for home.
They hadn't, no. They had simply anchored out of sight near the island of Tenedos. And under the cloak of night, the ships of Agamemnon, Nestor, Ajax, and Diomedes return their arrival completely unnoticed by the slumbering Trojans.
So the horse, now inside the city walls, becomes the instrument of Troy's downfall, disgorging armed men into its very heart.
Right.
And simultaneously, the Greek fleet lands, and thousands more soldiers pour through the now opened gates.
The documentary does a really good job of painting this vivid picture of chaos unleashed. It's just this torrent of violence overwhelming a city that's completely unaware, vulnerable in its sleep and drunken revelry.
And the first sounds would have been these horrifying cries of the defenseless right.
Yeah.
The documentary recounts the brutal slaughter of men, women, and children, the violation of sacred spaces, the murder of priests at their altars. Agamemnon, fueled by years of war and a thirst for vengeance, had given the merciless order that no Trojan son or daughter should be spared.
And amidst this carnage, the aged King Priam, in a final desperate act of defiance, dons his long unused armor. He grabs a sword, a completely futile gesture against the overwhelming force, and confronts the invaders in his own palace.
Wow.
The documentary describes his capture, his hair being dragged through the bloodied courtyards, and his brutal murder at the altar of Zeus.
Oh my God.
It's a sacrilege that really underscores the complete breakdown of order.
The devastation is absolute. Hecuba, Cassandra, and Andromache are captured, their royal status now meaningless as they're dragged away to a future of enslavement. It's a scene of utter tragedy, the complete annihilation of a once proud city.
And in the midst of this horror, Menelaus, driven by years of rage and the desire for retribution, searches frantically through the ravaged palace for Helen, and the documentary describes their encounter in her chamber. She is alone, silent, 10 years of war, 10 years of bloodshed because of her, yet she displays no fear, maybe even a strange sense of resignation. What do you make of her reaction?
It's profoundly ambiguous. You'd expect fury accusations, a dramatic confrontation, but instead there's this unsettling silence.
Right.
Menelaus, his sword still dripping with the blood of Troy, hesitates, and then wordlessly takes Helen by the arm and leads her away from the ongoing slaughter. Their reunion offers no sense of closure, no triumphant return.
No, it doesn't. And the documentary then shifts focus to a tragic final chapter involving Achilles.
Right.
He arrives at Priam's palace, now a scene of utter devastation, and encounters Polyxena, Priam's youngest daughter, renowned for her beauty and innocence. As drunken Greek soldiers attempt to assault her, Achilles surprisingly intervenes.
Oh, wow.
Seemingly moved by her plight and a sudden, perhaps fleeting vision.
What vision?
Well, the documentary suggests this vision was a peaceful life he might have had.
Right.
A life with a woman resembling Polyxena, surrounded by family. For a brief moment, the seemingly invincible warrior confronts the life he chose, the glory he pursued, and the peace he forever forfeited. But fate, as always, intervenes cruelly. Hidden from view, Paris, consumed by a desperate need for revenge for the deaths of his brothers and the destruction of his city, draws his bow. He aims for Achilles' back, but the arrow, guided by a divine hand, veers and strikes Achilles in his heel.
Right. The documentary reminds us of the myth, Achilles' mother Thetis had dipped him in the river Styx to make him invulnerable, but the heel by which she held him remained untouched by the magical waters. That single vulnerable spot becomes his undoing.
A fatal flaw, both literally and perhaps metaphorically.
Yeah.
As Troy burns Achilles, the greatest of the Greek heroes dies from this seemingly insignificant wound and his dying thoughts. The documentary suggests echo his mother's prophecy, a glorious but short life if he chose war, a long but ultimately forgotten life if he chose peace. A truly tragic irony.
The aftermath is total annihilation. Troy is utterly consumed by flames reduced to smoldering ruins. Paris and Achilles both lie dead, and in a really chilling detail, the documentary mentions the horrific act of newborns being flung from the city walls. Even Hector's young son, Astyanax, is thrown to his death.
The brutality is just staggering. The temples of the gods are defiled, running with blood, and Zeus, observing this utter devastation from on high, is depicted in the documentary as deeply troubled.
Right.
There's this sense of mirroring of chaos. The discord among humans is reflected in this growing strife among the gods themselves.
Wow.
The very foundations of their world, both mortal and divine, seem shaken. And Zeus, the documentary suggests, understands this delicate balance, this symbiotic link between the gods and human belief. As piety erodes, as humanity descends into these brutal acts, the gods themselves risk fading into oblivion, their power waning with the faith of their worshippers. A new, harsher era is dawning.
And the documentary concludes with Odysseus' long journey home to Ithaca. Not a triumphant return of a conquering hero, but a weary, disillusioned man haunted by the decade of war and the unimaginable death he has witnessed. The victory itself feels tainted, the cost far outweighing any perceived glory.
Absolutely.
So as we emerge from this deep dive into the ashes of Troy,
Yeah.
what are the key insights for you, the listener?
Well, I think it's a story that exposes the deceptive nature of appearances,
Right.
the catastrophic consequences of unchecked rage and ambition, the unpredictable and often cruel hand of fate, and this chilling fragility of even the most powerful civilizations.
Right. And thinking about why you chose this story for a deep dive, it really underscores the importance of critical thinking, right? Of looking beyond the surface narratives that we're presented with and understanding the potential long-term costs of our decisions, both personal and collective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's a final thought to really consider. Reflecting on the immense human cost of the Trojan War, what are the enduring legacies of such conflicts even today? Do the ends ever truly justify such brutal means? And what modern-day Trojan horses might we be unknowingly welcoming into our own lives or societies, ideas, technologies, ideologies that seem like gifts, but might contain hidden dangers? This ancient story, though steeped in myth, continues to offer profound lessons about human nature, deception, and the enduring unpredictability of fate.